Hey guys, my name's Laura and this is my first YouTube video. It's actually my third time trying to make this video, but I'm sure it will be better this time. So I have an Instagram account which I dedicate towards my recovery, my struggles with mental illness and self-harm, and I just thought that it would be a good idea to make a YouTube channel so I can interact with you guys a little bit more, share a little bit more about where I've come from and that sort of thing. So yeah. I think that this video will just be a little bit of a background story as to how I got to where I am today and that kind of thing. So, just excuse me, I have notes on my phone so I don't forget about what's happened to me. So basically, everything really started with my self-harm, really. I mean, it's kind of funny because you would assume for it to start with my depression, but really it kind of started the other way around. My friend at the time had told me that she'd cut herself, and me being naive and little, I was only 2010, so I was only young, she told me that she'd cut herself, and so I didn't know what to do, and I told her that I had cut myself when I really hadn't. So I don't know, I guess I was trying to make her feel not so alone, or that I understood, or whatever. Anyway, I had to keep up with this lie, and I don't know how I did it, but I ended up doing scratches on my arm, showing them to her, and saying, hey, you know, look what I'm doing. And then I kind of had to put on this facade, this kind of persona that I was depressed and cutting myself all the time and stuff, which I really wasn't. And eventually, I guess over the course of a few months, it kind of just became my way of dealing with everything, and I don't know, I just developed an addiction from there. So that was 2010, lasted pretty much the whole year. Once it got to 2011, I made a New Year's resolution with one of my friends that we were going to be healthy and exercise and do, you know, that kind of traditional New Year's resolution. And I guess I just took it a little bit too far, and people started to comment on how skinny I had gotten and how much weight I had lost, and in my head I'm going, oh my god, this is great, look at all the attention I'm getting for losing weight, like, this is awesome. And from there, I think that's when my eating disorder really kind of started. It wasn't intentional at first, but once I realised that I was losing weight and people were like commenting on it, even though they were negative comments, I just got sucked in. So I began restricting heavily. I was already cutting out junk, but from there I started really restricting what I was eating and over-exercising to the point where I was exercising about 4 hours every day. And I lost my period for a year, my hair was falling out. I mean, I never got to the point where I was like emaciated, but I definitely was heading down the path. So eventually my parents took me to the doctor, and I was a sneaky little thing and convinced everyone that I wasn't doing it on purpose, that it was solely for health, and I was just taking it a little bit too far because I was young and I didn't understand. So I got put with a dietitian, and she put me on a meal plan to gain weight, and I literally couldn't get out of it. I was so like poorly that I couldn't be bothered to fight. So I ended up putting on a lot of weight. I developed binge eating from all of that time of restricting myself and now having to eat food. I just overdid it every single time. I was binge eating every single day, and then I would compensate for it by starving myself for the next few hours of that day, and then it would get to 6 PM and I would just go full out binging again. So it was a really awful cycle for me to be in. During that time, I pretty much didn't cut. I guess I was like fueling the addiction in another way. I don't know how it worked out, but yeah. By 2012, I was in year 11 at school, and having put on this weight, my body image and self-confidence was like rock bottom. I couldn't handle it, and my cutting returned. This time a little bit more serious. Still never to the point of needing stitches, but like it was definitely progressing down that road. My parents up to this point were completely oblivious for my struggles with mental health, and Eventually they discovered my cutting, and I was put with a psychologist who I stayed with for about a year. She didn't really help. I mean, to be honest, I wasn't motivated to get better, so I can't really blame her for it, but yeah, I definitely think I got worse in my time seeing her. I am an overachiever, so the stress of school really got to me. I put a lot of pressure on myself to perform and achieve. So it was at the point where I was waking up at 3 o'clock in the morning freaking out because I hadn't done a certain part of an assignment, so I'd sit there and do it. This was like every day. Yeah, it was pretty insane. When I got to the end of year 11, I ended up being the top of my grade out of about 200 students, and so the following year, in year 12, I had this expectation of myself that I had to reach the same level. I had to perform as good as I did the year before. And once I realised that I was burnt out and I physically could not study anymore, I crumbled. My mental health absolutely went rock bottom. I couldn't attend school. This was about halfway through last year. I couldn't attend school. I was missing 3 weeks at a time. I was just not coming. I couldn't get myself out of bed. At that point, my self-harm got a lot worse. I was having to go to the doctor about weekly to get my cuts steri-stripped, and eventually my parents discovered my stash of painkillers. I had about 60 Panadol and Nurofen that I was collecting to obviously overdose with. From there, my mum took me to the doctor and I confessed, and my doctor put me with the government service, so the Child and Youth Mental Health Service, who I stayed with for about 2 months, just having weekly appointments, and they discharged me after about 2 months when my suicide ideation had decreased. Pretty much after I wasn't a threat to kill myself. They really didn't give a shit about me, which is kind of awful, but that's the government services for you. So I ended up having to get a lot of medical exemptions for my schoolwork, my exams, my assignments, but eventually I graduated. Once I graduated, I had the elation of having all of the pressure lifted off of me, and basically my depression and my anxiety and my paranoia basically all lifted. I mean, I was still binge eating and starving, but yeah, my mood was definitely improved. I was able to celebrate school years and have the traditional celebration period after graduation. Once the reality set in at the start of this year, I think that's when it all came back. I got to the end of last year and my body image was absolutely awful. I hated myself. I absolutely loathed myself. So I got to the start of this year and made my New Year's resolution that I was going to restrict and start losing weight again. Within 5 days that failed, and I ended up binge eating again, but this time I was so fed up with myself that I made myself sick. That was the very first time I had ever done it, I think it was the 6th of January, and every day for 5 months after that I was doing it multiple times a day. I felt this sense of empowerment of, hey, look what I can do. I can eat all of this food and get rid of it, go me. So that continued, and then at the same time my mood was plummeting. I was not getting out of bed. I was sleeping all day, literally from about 5 AM till 6 PM I was sleeping, and then all night I would binge and purge and cut. So my parents basically got fed up and we were fighting constantly. I was fed up. I ended up saving up my antidepressants and taking an overdose of them as a suicide attempt. And I got taken to the hospital in an ambulance where I was given Valium to calm my heart rate because my resting heart rate was 150 beats per minute, and I was put in ICU for risk of seizures. eventually after about 6 hours I was allowed to go, and I was watched for a couple of hours, and then they let me go home, stupidly, but hey. After about 2 weeks of being with the acute mental health care team and really no improvement, and I was just plummeting even lower really, I was binging and purging 6 times a day. So I went to a psychiatrist who put me inpatient at my local private hospital, where I stayed for 7 weeks. At that point my cutting was controlled because there was a threat of me being sent to a secure unit if I cut myself while I was in hospital, but my eating disorder was completely out of control. I was still binging and purging because it was a general mental health ward. There was full access to the kitchen, so I took full advantage of that, and I also had my own private bathroom, so I could purge freely, pretty much better than I could even at home. So yeah, after 7 weeks my medication was being controlled. I was diagnosed with depression, bulimia and psychosis for my paranoia, and I was put on medications, and once they were controlled, my psychiatrist felt like I had improved enough for him to let me go home, so I was discharged. And within hours of being home I was cutting again and binging and purging continually. I think I stayed home for about 2 or 3 weeks. In that time I was binging and purging back up to 6 times a day. I ended up having to get stitches, 15 stitches in my arm. So I went to get a checkup with my psychiatrist, and he decided on the spot that it was time to admit me again, but this time with the intention of transferring me to an eating disorder unit. So I was admitted back to my local private hospital, and I stayed there for 2 weeks, and at that point I was pretty much fed up with having to deal with my bulimia. I was just so worn out and exhausted from having to throw up all of my food. So I put a case to my psychiatrist that I wanted to go home because I was getting away with purging easier when I was at the hospital, so if I was to go home then I would be accountable to my parents, and that would hopefully control my purging a lot more. So she discharged me, and now, that brings me to now, I'm on the waiting list to go to an eating disorder unit down about an hour away from me, and I'm basically just waiting around for that. And I'm not going to lie, I'm struggling. It is difficult at home, but I'm sure that with going to the eating disorder unit will be really helpful for me. I mean, my medication at the moment is really controlling my depression and my psychosis, so that's pretty much under control, and I'm really just struggling with my bulimia. But yeah, like I said, that's soon to be controlled, so I can look forward to that. Anyway, that's basically how I got to where I am today. You guys will have to comment and give me some more ideas of what videos I can make, what things you want to hear. I'm pretty much an open book, so you can ask me anything. Hope you enjoyed. Thanks. Bye.